What is up, everybody, and welcome to the Finger WAG podcast. Very excited to bring to you our very first official episode. My name is Gideon. I'm the host of the Finger WAG podcast. I will be joined today by a contributor of the Finger WAG, Jake Foote. You all know Jake from his work across the Hoya Nation, breaking down rosters, giving you insights with a lot of statistical look at how the Hoyas are doing, analytics, all of that stuff. Jake is going to be a regular voice that you will hear on the podcast, and he is going to be joining me a little bit later for our second or third episode that will break down the NBA draft and the two Hoyas who are in the draft. So we wanted to get him on here early as part of our intro series that we'll be doing with all of the contributors for the Finger Wag podcast. We'll talk about his take on the 24-25 season, his outlook to the 25-26 season, as well as get into how he became a Hoya fan and his all-time list of Hoyas. Without further ado, here is the Finger Wag podcast.
What is up, everybody? We are here. The Finger WAG podcast is live. I am here, joined by Jake Foote, who's going to introduce himself in a second. A lot of you know Jake from Twitter and some of the writing that he's done over the years. He is going to be one of the voices that you're going to hear from on the Finger WAG podcast, on the blog. He's going to be producing content, giving us some analysis, insights into the roster, all of that. I'm really excited to kick things off with him. Jake, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Tell us a little bit about your sort of Hoya story. How did you become a fan? I know you're a former student, excuse me. Tell me a little bit about your Hoya story, if you will.
So I was a student, graduated in class of 2018, which means I enrolled in the fall of 2014, and that essentially aligns with when I became a pretty diehard fan of the program. Prior to that, I was always a basketball junkie, consumed Big East basketball, college basketball quite a bit. I had multiple cousins go to Georgetown, so always kept plenty of tabs. And my dad actually went to Maryland, so was quite aware of what Georgetown meant, both regionally in the DMV and nationally. Then once I went to Georgetown, I just, part of the reason I was so excited to go there was to be a part of major college basketball hoops, a part of the Big East. And unfortunately, kind of ushered in a decade's worth of disappointment and sadness. But I'm stuck. They got me forever. So we'll be here for as long as Georgetown has a basketball program.
It's good to know that this is not a mystery podcast or a true crime podcast, but I think it's good to know that we've found the culprit, the person responsible for the decade of Georgetown Hoya mediocrity.
Yeah, it's me and a couple other guys that were far better basketball players than me.
So 2014 was one of the last like good years of the JT3 era, is that right?
Yeah, they were a 4 seed that year. I think second in the Big East in the regular season. It's a good season. Beat Villanova at home. Gave Utah a fight in the tournament. Utah gave Duke a fight that year, who ended up winning the national championship. It was a good team. Jabril's senior year.
2014 was the last year that we won a tournament game
Correct. Yes.
before losing to Utah in the second round.
Yep. And then
Well, hopefully
downhill
we'll be back
since.
there.
Hopefully.
So tell me your favorite Hoya memory, not necessarily from the last decade, but just in general. What's that moment for you that
Hmm.
screams Hoya Saxa?
I would, interestingly enough, but prior to enrolling, I was probably on the other end of some Georgetown moments. I was for sure rooting for Davidson. My dad grew up with McKillop, who was the coach of Davidson, so was very against the Hoyas on that day. Was definitely rooting for BC on the day Georgetown beat them
Ooh.
in the tournament. Just locally being from Massachusetts, I definitely favored the Eagles. But then once I got there, I think this sounds depressing in hindsight, but there was the weekend that we beat Villanova. We beat Villanova on a Monday. That Saturday, we had beat Butler on a last-second shot on a 6 o'clock Saturday game, and after that whole weekend, we were just hooked, me and all my buddies in my class. And since then, again, there hasn't been that much. Obviously, the Big East Championship would have been a fond memory, but I hold some disdain for it because we weren't actually allowed to be there. And had everybody been in New York for that, I think that would 100% take the cake. But I'll call it winning games, beating number 4 ranked Villanova, beating Butler on a game-winning shot, all within a 72-hour span. That was fun.
Do you remember who hit that shot?
Copeland. Copeland on the left corner. Devontae's blocked Rosie Jones's layup at the buzzer.
Yeah. That's got to be the last shot Isaac Copeland ever made as a Georgetown Hoya. Still one of
That
the
was like
most
middle of the season.
befuddling trajectories of a Hoya player.
He was good the remaining month and a half of that year. I thought he was going to be awesome.
He was great.
Yeah,
He was
he
great.
was. They
And
played
then
St. John's at the end of
came
that
back
year, and
next
he
year,
had
and
like
it just like,
it never clicked. I don't know. Curse of the Hoyas.
yeah, weird. Yeah, maybe in a future episode, future season, we'll revive the true crime Finger WAG pod and dive into the Isaac Copeland story, what happened there. The Davidson game is definitely my least favorite Hoya memory, one of the lowest moments of Hoya fandom. It is the second lowest for both of my parents who went to Georgetown, graduated in like, I think 78 or something, and did not come out of their house for a month after the Villanova national championship game. So that's number one for them. I was not alive at that time. That doesn't make my list, but worst moment for sure, the Davidson game.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I think if I was around for Davidson, Ohio, and Florida Gulf Coast, I might not be still around. Sorry to bring that up.
That was rough. I remember it well. I am still around. I am happy to say that I lived through the curse of Dunk City and looking at brighter futures. So tell me your all-time Hoya starting five, and I'm gonna stipulate on top of that it can't include Patrick, Zoe, Dikembe, even though this is the Finger WAG pod named for the great Dikembe Mutombo. May he rest in peace, or Allen Iverson. I'm going to say all four of those guys are, grandfathered in. They're absolutely on almost all of our lists. So set those guys aside. Who's your all-time starting five?
Okay, I'm gonna add a second stipulation. Because I think on any all-time five, you'd have Sleepy and Reggie Williams on there. But the way I wanted to approach this was do it since the turn of the century, because that's when I started watching Big East basketball. These are only people that I was able to watch play when they were on Georgetown. So my five: Jonathan Wallace. He was awesome. He was awesome even as a third-party viewer. Just tough shot after tough shot. This is going to be recency bias, but I'm going to include Micah. I just loved him this year more than any player that we've had in the last 11 years. And he did it on both sides, and he deserved a better team around him. And what he was the last month of the season, I think, is by far and away the best individual player we've had since Otto. And I think he's gonna, unless things really, skyrocket, and he was a guy that established the culture here once again, he's probably gonna get forgotten over time because it was just a one year season in which we didn't make the tournament. But he was exceptional, and I'll love him forever. Third, or let's go front court, Jeff and Otto. I think the two best guys of the 21st century that we've had. I don't think I really have to elaborate to anybody how good they were. And then tough one deciding a center, but I think I'm gonna go. I got into Big East when I was like 5, 6, 7 years old, watching BC play. Those BC teams had Troy Bell, and Cooley was actually an assistant on those teams. And I thought Mike Sweetney when I was 7 years old was extremely cool. So I'm gonna roll with Sweetney. Hard to leave off Hibbert there, but we're gonna roll with Sweetney.
Wow. I mean, that is remarkably close to what I've got. Sweetness is just a great choice. People forget how good Mike Sweetney was. He was incredible.
Incredible. Top 10 pick. Well, we've had what, 2 since? Jeff and Otto.
Yeah, he was so good. The Micah Peavy selection is a great choice. I totally agree with you. People are going to forget Micah because it was 1 year, non-tournament team. But if you just look at what he did almost single-handedly to turn around Georgetown's defense, which was one of the worst in the entire country, even going back before Ed Cooley, but Ed Cooley's first year, one of the worst in the entire country. He was an absolute animal on the defensive end. I, to this day, will go back and watch clips of what he was doing, and it is insane. And then the ability to make shots down the stretch, his shooting was just out of this world. I'm with you. I loved what Micah Peavy did last year. He was a lot of fun to watch, and he might, as the years go, he might get forgotten. He should not. He was probably the best individual defender, most talented individual defender that Georgetown has had in a very long time.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think anytime a kid makes that type of improvement in his offensive game and in his shooting, it just preaches to that the kid is just a tireless worker. Did it on both ends, never took a night off. And I think what I most enjoyed about him, which we haven't had a guy like this ever since I've been there, he won 4, 5, 6 of those games last year just because Micah Peavy decided we were going to win that basketball game. He did it against Nova twice. He basically single-handedly blew out Creighton. Did it at the home Butler game. An absolute joy to watch. I don't think he did a single thing on the basketball court over 30 games that brought me down at all. He was a pleasure. He deserves all the accolades, and hopefully getting drafted in a couple weeks because I think he can help an NBA team.
Yeah, well, a little bit of a preview here. I think we want to do some sort of draft preview. Obviously, with Sorber and Peavy both, Sorber definitely going uh in the first round, most likely, and Peavy, who knows? But what do you think about Peavy's NBA upside?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I'm quite confident he's going to get picked. There was a lot of guys that are going back to school, which depleted 5 to 10 people that would have been in that 25 to 45 range. And of everybody at the combine, nobody at the combine had more steals than him this past season. And nobody in the combine had more than 1.5 steals per game, shot it and scored it as efficiently as he did. And I think there's a role for that on any team. As far as his upside, that's tough because he's 24. He measured 6'6", a little under 6'6.5" without shoes, which means he's 6'7", which is probably what we all thought he was. But in the NBA, he's probably going to be more of a 2 guard than any sort of forward. He'll really have to make sure that he's still shooting the ball at the level that he shot it this year, that he can be a secondary facilitator, which he was this year. But he's going to be such a high-level defender that can defend guards that I think he catches on, especially if he's on a winning team or a team that needs a bench defender. And I think he plays at least a couple years in the league. And on the high end, if he ends up getting a legitimate role and he shoots it well, maybe an Andre Jackson type at Milwaukee who played for UConn, similar profiles. I think the worst case scenario for me is more like I don't know, like a Jaden Springer, just bench defender. Your guys are going to be down in the regular season. He can come in and play hard as hell, 20 minutes here and there, but it's going to be hard for him to stick around for a long period of time. But I do think he has the qualities to to make it.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think if he's going to stick around, it's going to come down to his offensive game because defensively, he's all that. I wrote a piece at the end of the year that compared him to Bobby Jones, former Duke player coming out of the draft, coming out of college. This was back in 70s, maybe early 80s. But I remember listening to podcasts or something with George Karl, former head coach of the Nuggets, former head coach of the Sonics, UNC guy. He said Bobby Jones was the best individual defender that he had ever seen. And Micah Peavy reminds me a lot of Bobby Jones in that he can take over a game defensively. He can both with his positioning and his athleticism. I think you're right that, he profiles as that as a two guard. I think he can guard up in size, but it's all going to come down to can he shoot? And I think worst case scenario, I like your Jaden Springer comp as a worst case. To me, it's like, is he a Matisse Thybulle that everybody likes the idea of, but he can't make a shot or do anything on the offensive end, so he can't play? Or, I mean, this is way high end, but a guy like Herb Jones, that mold of guy that every single NBA team is looking for right now. Everybody wants a long two or three who can defend like crazy and make shots. And if he can just make shots, I think he's got a role to play in the league.
Yeah,
But we'll have to see.
and I think this happens every year around the draft because of the timing of it is so close to the finals that you see these teams make it, and you see that they get there in large part because they guard. And he could be Aaron Nesmith. He's going to have to figure out how to be a 38% 3-point shooter. But Nesmith made things difficult for Brunson for 7 games and was a serious, or 6 games I should say, and was a serious difference maker. It's tough to compare him to any of the OKC guys because Caruso, Dort, and Wallace are just such good players. These teams that are trying to make the jump from middle of the road to a playoff team that potentially may already have their guys, their nucleus. Nobody is looking in the second round for a guy that's going to be a real impact guy. They're looking for quality on the fringes. And I think with the way the second apron is now, and you need guys on rookie deals to be able to play, there's more value in drafting a Micah than drafting a 19, 20-year-old kid that can't play yet. So I think he's got a real chance. I think he's such a quality kid, good family, coach's son. He's going to be a professional at whatever locker room he ends up in. I'm optimistic, and it'll be a joy to watch him wherever he ends up.
Yeah, I'm excited about your prediction that he's going to get drafted. I think he should. So I'm all in there. Whether he's drafted or not, I am definitely excited to tune in to Summer League to see him just dominate some of those 19 and 18-year-olds who don't know how to play yet that you talk about, because I think he's going to show out there, and it's all just a question of his offensive upside. But we'll get more into the draft preview and talk about Micah and Thomas and the Georgetown guys in the draft here. You've already talked a little bit about it. Obviously, Micah getting on your all-time starting 5 is a is a big accolade. Tell me a little bit about what your favorite moments or the highlights or what you'll take away from last year from the 2024 Hoyas.
Okay, I'm going to take away just big picture. And my big picture takeaway is that for the first time in a long time, the program made a return to high major hoops. They operated like a high major program. They won games against high major programs. They won games on the road against high major programs. And they're going to put 1, potentially 2 guys into the NBA, which is what a healthy high major program should be doing on a regular basis. We're probably going to look back in a couple of years and say, damn, how did a team with Peavy and Sorber not win more? But a lot of things in reality, didn't go their way. They had a deal. They lost Sorber for 10 games. Epps wasn't the same after the ankle injury. And quite frankly, they weren't in a position yet to recruit depth, and it reared its head, especially later in the season. not gonna sit here and say that they're in a great shape, but I can pretty confidently say that Cooley and the staff, at the very least, really raised the floor. The question in the next few years will be how high can that ceiling get? But it was an enjoyable year for me. They played really hard, especially when Sorber was out there. They played very good defensively. There was only a couple nights they really lied down, and I think the nights that they lied down were towards the end of the year when they just didn't really measure up athletically or talent wise to some of the teams at the higher level of the Big East. But I think it was a step in the right direction and the establishment of maintaining a healthy program. That's my major takeaway.
I think that's absolutely right. I agree with it 100%. Step in the right direction. There are people who are going to look at losing to DePaul 3 times and say that that is unacceptable and that negates everything else that they did. I just don't think that that's true. I think you have to look at the context, and the context there is by the time that they were in those games and at the end of the season, they had completely lost their depth. Not only without Thomas Sorber, but without Big Julius, who I think is going to be a big part of this team next year, who in the first couple of games of the season looked like he might even be a better offensive prospect than Thomas. Now, I don't think he actually was, but he looked more immediately comfortable to me in a couple of ways. And I think that losing your first and second options and then not having the depth that you mentioned hurts. And the team, I think, way overperformed relative to that. And I mean, it's hard for me to, there's no, obviously, the season is the season, but if Sorber stays healthy, there's a good chance that that is a tournament team. They're close to it, at least. And
Yeah,
that is
I think
where you want to be.
I agree. I think if they were healthy start to finish, Epps and Sorber, they were probably right there edging up to the bubble, and they probably would have been a real nuisance for anybody to play in New York at Big East. As far as Julius, I think they really did need him down the stretch, although he wasn't the version of him first semester was out of shape, was injured. I think you're going to get hopefully, the skill that is advertised as for real, but he's going to be in a different level of shape, hopefully a different type of player. I'm totally willing to throw those last 8 games just out the window, which sounds very homerish, but they didn't have a backup center. The center that they were playing was Fielder, and I think Fielder played hard, but Fielder was here for 2 years, and opponents shot better than 60% at the rim against him, almost nearing 70% at the rim against him. Over the course of those entire 2 years, we gift wrapped 2-point baskets at the rim, and we weren't talented enough to beat teams in shootouts. So I'm excited that in the future years, even if something, or hopefully if something goes wrong, that Cooley has enough depth and enough guys that fit the way that he wants to play that they'll at least defend. And at the end of the year, they couldn't defend. And it was similar. It was in a similar vein to the year prior. And those teams you just can't win games. So I'm willing to throw that out. We'll see what the next version looks like. But I agree. Pretty solid team when they were at full strength. Far better than anything we could have predicted prior to them starting the season, I think.
I think at their peak, they were around a top 30 defensive team. That fell
Yeah, they
off, as you
finished.
mentioned.
They were 35th in KenPom when Sorber went down. But I think the real interesting thing is that when Peavy and Sorber played together, they had a net defensive rating less than 91, which would have been the equivalent of the nation's 4th best defense. So they were a top elite defensive team when the two of those guys were out there. And then when they were handicapped in any sort of fashion, they didn't have the Jimmies and Joes to react to it. And it reared its head.
Elite defensive team is not something that I thought was even remotely on the radar from the past couple years when they were the worst, certainly the worst high major defensive team. But one of the worst defensive teams in the country. And that alone should say something about last year's team, the staff, Cooley, what they were able to do. That is remarkable.
Agreed. And it's a real testament to just how much of a unicorn Sorber was. Just so good. But I think the staff is also learning their lessons, hopefully.
Yeah. We'll talk about
the type of player they need to be successful on that side of the court no matter what.
100%. And more to come on that in future episodes. So we started to get into it, but let me get your official prediction, bold prediction for next year. It can be anything. It can be about where they finish, make the tournament, whatever, about the team, individual players. What's your big prediction for the 2025-2026?
Okay, I think it's tough for me to pick just one, and I really kind of want to emphasize something that might be bolder, or at least something that I think is likely to happen, even though we may not be thinking about it. And I'm not going to guess on the record. I'm really not going to guess on how certain guys play, but I think just watching the last 8 games of the season this year and watching how frustrating that was, not only for us, but obviously for the staff, I think Vince Iwuchukwu, the transfer from St. John's, ends up playing the lion's share minutes at center, at least depending on his foul trouble. And I think this could happen in one of two fashions, or one of two ways, I should say. Either Julius isn't totally up for it physically yet, or Vince takes a jump. And Vince is, for those that haven't seen him play a lot, he's huge. He's 7'1", 250. He's got arms like Sorber. He can run. He can jump. I think every coach that's coached him would probably say he's got all the talent you need to be a successful player. He's just he's still definitely picking up how to play. And, if Andy Enfield and Patino didn't really crack him, what are the chances Cooley does? But Cooley has a pretty good track record with highly ranked recruits that are just looking for a little uptick in usage and role and belief. And I think there's a chance that if they reel Vince in a little bit, especially offensively, and kind of just make him a rim running dunker that's a real elite rim protector, he's going to establish a baseline for them defensively that may be significant enough to keep him on the court, regardless of what Julius is. So I think everyone's going to start talking about lineups in a few months. People are going to start hoping Julius has an arrival in a similar vein to Sorber. We're probably going to hear a lot of hype about it, but I'm growing more and more optimistic that Iwuchukwu just establishes a very good baseline and thus is going to play a lot.
I love that. In part, I just 100% agree with you. I think it's a really sneaky good addition. But I think the thing you mentioned about Cooley and what he can do with kids like Iwuchukwu, where obviously Rick Pitino, one of the greatest college basketball coaches, one of the greatest basketball coaches ever, Cooley has a way of helping guys like Vince by defining a role. And as long as they buy into that, he does a really, really good job of bringing the best out of those players. You've seen it a number of times. I mean, you look back to Micah Peavy, but also, the way that Curtis Williams developed over the course of the year. He has a really good track record for that, I agree. And in a way that, Pitino is just not, because he doesn't have to, is not catering to kids like that. He demands the best, and if you can't give it in the way that he defines it, you're not going to play. And more power to him. He's got the guys behind the next man up that's going to take minutes and take the spot and do what is asked. But Cooley has a really, really good track record with guys like that. I'm with you on the Vince hype.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say hype. I'm not promising anything spectacular, but I think you do have to consider that.
Fair. That's my word. I'm in the Vince hive.
I think he's going to play more than Julius. That will be my bold prediction. And I think we have to consider that at St. John's, part of the reason he probably didn't play for a few reasons, but one was he was behind a kid that's going to be an All-American this year. And Pitino is a no-nonsense, non-nurturing guy, and Cooley coaches the opposite to some extent. Cooley demands similar things that Pitino does, but he certainly does it from a more nurturing place, which I guess it will work for some and not work for others. We'll see if they can unlock something with Vince. It seems like two coaches are 0 for 2, but he has the tools to be a plus power conference big man.
All right. Any final words? Jake, we're going to hear a lot more from you in the coming weeks, in the coming months as we get into the season. I think we'll have you back on to talk more about the draft. That was just a tease for some of you folks who are interested in the breakdown of where Mike is going, where Thomas is going, all of that. Talk about the roster coming up. And any final thoughts for you on this intro?
I've got nothing major. I just want to say thanks for having me again. I appreciate anybody that's going to listen to this, that's going to tune into the eventual website, that's going to support Georgetown basketball as they hopefully take an extra step and an extra step and an extra step back into national relevance. I will say the people that are hanging on right now, just we may need to relax a little bit and not overreact to every game, to every recruit, every situation. Cooley has a positive track record, and there is a good chance that the program will be in a healthy position moving forward, even if not a national powerhouse, unless things start breaking their way. But again, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. Really excited for future episodes. I really appreciate it.
Very well said. Thanks, Jake.